The one-day text message story is still a one-day story, but not if you're CNN or MSNBC. Of course, to them, this whole thing is worse than January the 6th, but that's okay. They haven't won a news cycle since Joe Biden was president, so I don't fault them for trying. But why are they calling for Pete Hegseth's head right now? They want Donald Trump to fire Pete Hegseth because they are awful people, which I will show you in detail. And that's where we start tonight. Fire Pete Hegseth, not Michael Waltz, not the person who added Jeffrey Goldberg to the group chat in the first place, which makes no sense. The media are blaming it all on Pete Hegseth, which makes perfect sense because they didn't want him to be defense secretary in the first place. So they are trying to get him out of office right now, even though he literally had nothing to do with Jeffrey Goldberg being on that group chat. But this is what it's been like on the other networks all week long.
Pete Hegseth, which everybody knows he's unqualified to be the defense secretary, is responsible here. Donald Trump should fire Pete Hegseth.
The Secretary of Defense should be fired immediately if he's not man enough to own up to his mistakes and resign in disgrace.
You have called for Secretary Hegseth to resign, but do you believe he will?
I don't think so, but I think he should, out of a sense of duty and loyalty to the country.
Oh, the outrage. Suddenly the left cares about things going to plan. But why don't we rewind the clock to August of 2021 in a little event called the Afghanistan withdrawal? Joe Biden, Mark Milley, Lloyd Austin get 13 Americans killed. Here they are. Take a look, Democrats. 13 Americans were killed and almost 200 other people were killed when a suicide bomber drove into a crowd of people at Kabul airport and nobody got fired. In response to that, Joe Biden, Mark Milley, Lloyd Austin ordered a drone strike that missed its target. It ended up hitting a private home in Afghanistan, killing 10 innocent people, including 7 children, the youngest a 4-year-old child. These were innocent people, and nobody was fired. But it gets better. Not only was nobody fired, no one was demoted, no one was reassigned, and Mark Milley called the strike that killed an innocent family with 7 children a righteous strike.
Were there others killed? Yes, there are others killed. Who they are, we don't know. We'll try to sort through all that. But we believe that the procedures at this point, I don't want to influence the outcome of an investigation, but at this point we think that the procedures were correctly followed and it was a righteous strike.
Can you imagine that? A righteous strike and nobody was fired. Fast forward to February 2023, the same people, Joe Biden, Mark Milley, Lloyd Austin, let a Chinese spy balloon fly over the continental United States from Alaska to South Carolina, including over at least 11 U.S. military bases, before it was finally shot down over the Atlantic Ocean. The Pentagon officially characterizing that spy balloon as a surveillance balloon from China, and nobody was fired. Fast forward now, 1 year later to February 2024, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, our masked avenger, afraid of his own shadow. Lloyd, maybe if you need all of that gear and all of that apparatus, you're not the right guy to lead our troops into battle. Remember that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware? Imagine Lloyd Austin crossing the Delaware wearing all of that. In February of last year, Lloyd Austin checked himself into the hospital with cancer. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't tell the president. He didn't tell Congress. He didn't even tell his staff, meaning with a war raging in Ukraine and a war raging in Gaza, no one knew where our defense secretary was for over a week, and nobody was fired. And even today, Democrats don't like being asked about any of this because they know that they sound completely ridiculous.
Did you call for Lloyd Austin's resignation? Not only did we lose 13 service members, we left $70 billion worth of equipment that fell into the hands of the Taliban. A couple of years later, he was out of pocket for 2 weeks and didn't tell the White House. Did you ask for him to resign at this point? Are you actually asking for Hegseth and Waltz to resign when you didn't ask for Lloyd Austin?
There is nothing that Lloyd Austin did by getting health care treatment.
Okay, what about Afghanistan? What about Afghanistan? Did you guys forget that? The statute of limitations is over for 4 years?
In 4 years, after one mistake, followed by another mistake, Joe Biden never fired anyone, not Merrick Garland for being such a terrible lawyer, not Alejandro Mayorkas for being such a terrible person, not Antony Blinken for being perhaps the worst American diplomat in history. If his job was to start wars and then keep them going, mission accomplished, Antony. Not Mayor Pete for East Palestine, Ohio, or the supply chain crisis, or the baby formula crisis. Not Kamala Harris for doing nothing as border czar, but letting in millions of illegal aliens. Here is what a real defense secretary looks like, Lloyd. Take a look. And this right here is what a real vice president looks like, Kamala. This is what being likable looks like. In fact, Kamala, you got 4 years until you run again. Maybe you should study this video right here. J.D. Vance wanted to have lunch with his fellow Marines. Take a look. So J.D. Vance, they told us he was weird. This is just a normal guy. And look at his hat. Once a Marine, always a Marine. He sat down with fellow Marines and had breakfast. That's what being vice president looks like. Learn from that, Kamala. The left are just so completely lost, and everyone thinks all of this is a new thing, but guess what? None of this is a new thing. They've always been lost. It's just all finally being exposed. Did you know that after Pearl Harbor, George Bush Sr. lied about his age and enlisted in the Navy, and at one point was the youngest fighter pilot in the U.S. Navy? The point that I'm making is that men in the old days would lie about their age to fight for this country. But today, because of Democrats, men are lying about their gender so they can beat women in sports. That's what we've become. And any call to fire Pete Hegseth or Michael Waltz by Democrats should be answered with laughter, because Democrats are not serious people, and they are definitely not serious leaders.